quick photo of, guys.
Yeah. Should we?
Where's Arana?
Maybe I can.
Arana?
Slide, are you able to?
Yep. Yeah.
This way, please. Tēnā rā tātou katoa, tātou hui mai nei ki tēnei takiwā o te whenua. Ko puki tāpapa te manga, ko te moana o mā nuku hotu roa tēnā. E karanga mai ana ki a mātou, kia hui ki tēnei kaupapa whakahirihira. Nō reira, ngā rangatira, ngā mema o te kawana, ko tira te koromatua tēnā koutou. Ngā rangatira o ngā iwi, kua tai mai i tēnei kaupapa ngā mihi ki a tātou. O tira a tātou katoa e hui mai ana i tēnei ata. Ki te whakanui tēnei kaupapa nui ngā whare mō ngā tangata katoa. Tērā kōrero, e ha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata. Tika tonu tērā kōrero. Nā tēnā ko ngā mea toru e tino matua ana, ko ngā whare, ko te kai, ko te aroha ki wainga nui ngā tangata, nō reira ngami. Ngā rangatira, kua ngaia e nei whare, Fred Ma, nā mi ki o koutou. O tira kainga ora, koutou ngā rangatira o kainga ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko mātou tēnei, māua tēnei no Ngāti Whātua, e ngā Ngāti Whanaunga, kua tai mai ki te tautoko o te kaupapa nui, nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, mōrena. Just to say a bit in English what I just said, we're very grateful and honoured to be able to be part of this day, alongside our rangatira of Tāmaki Makaurau, our poromatua and our ministers. I won't name you all just in case I forget. But also alongside our other iwi here, Ngāti Whanaunga and Martin, just to acknowledge the hard work that is done and all the preparation and to get to this final time this morning to celebrate the building of homes. So I mihi to Martin and his team Piritahi, and also to Kainga Ora for this venture, which I know will go on. I believe a transaction will take place after this karakia, and a swapping of money, and there's been a big talk this morning.
I cash, thank you.
Where's your sack?
Coffee, but we'll watch this transaction take place. But it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Ngāti Whātua, and I'm sure on behalf of Ngāti Whanaunga. Many of us are spread across Tāmaki today, but great to be here amongst us all. Tēnā koutou. I won't sing away because we're short of time, but he mihi he karakia. Nō me no tā.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Just a whakakara.
Okay.
Actually, at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Roskill.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou ina mātawaka, tēnā koutou te hai kāinga Ngāti Whātua Oraki, tēnā koutou. Nā mātou huhuia o te wā, haere atu rā. Hoki mai ki a tātou te konahi ora e tēnei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Well, thank you very much, Clay and Willis, for your welcome to this announcement and for starting us off. I'd like to acknowledge some of the people that are here with us today. Mayor Phil Goff, wonderful to be back here with you. A whole 2 days since I was with you, Mayor Goff. To the Chair of Kainga Ora, Vui Mark Goshi, wonderful to be here with you today. To my colleagues, local MP, the Honourable Michael Wood, and Arana Williams, a local Member of Parliament too. Also wonderful to have the Chief Executive of Kainga Ora, Andrew McKenzie, here with us today. And it's great to be back at Freeland Reserve in the heart of Kāinga-Ora's large-scale project here in Mt Roskill. This is a suburb which the government, alongside Auckland Council, has identified as an area that needs more housing growth. In 2020, our government allocated $8 million in stormwater upgrades here as part of the Roskill South Housing Shovel Ready project. This shovel-ready infrastructure funding will enable the Freeland Reserve to service over 750 houses and dwellings, and I understand that approximately 550 of these would have been a lot more difficult to build, involving extensive use of water tanks were it not for this funding. Further shovel-ready funding of $180 million has supported significant infrastructure projects across the Auckland large-scale projects, including wastewater and stormwater upgrades and work to address flooding issues. And we can see the development here where we are today at Freeland Reserve is now significantly underway. And it has not only enabled quality new homes, which we can see all around us, but it's also improved the landscape and the environment of neighbouring communities. And I think it's worth noting that actually in the recent flooding in Auckland, that this was an area that withstood the deluge and didn't flood. So we've already seen the benefits of this stormwater work and in terms of helping this broader community, not just the Kāinga-Ora build. So this is the kind of progress we are going to see more of following today's announcement. Decades of underinvestment in housing and infrastructure has meant there are not enough homes to meet demand, especially for affordable homes. We know a key barrier to unlocking more housing growth is funding into critical infrastructure. So our government has stepped up to help. In March 2021, right here, we announced the $3.8 billion Housing Acceleration Fund, or the HAF, to help New Zealand build houses more quickly. A key component of the Housing Acceleration Fund includes funding to progress Kāinga-Ora's large-scale projects. The Auckland large-scale projects are in areas where the government owns significant amounts of land that can be better utilised, and with public housing that needs replacing and infrastructure that needs upgrading. These projects are happening in centrally located suburbs with good public transport options and other amenities like schools and shops. These are places where people want to live and where it makes sense to create more density. Last year I announced $282 million of Tranche 1 funding for the large-scale projects in Mt Roskill, Mangere, Tāmaki, Oranga and Northcote from the Housing Acceleration Fund. That funding was for the design works and infrastructure to enable 1,260 additional homes. This work is underway and some projects have even been completed from that Tranche 1 funding. So today's announcement is for the second drawdown of funding for the large-scale projects. I'm joined by the Mayor of Auckland because together we have recognised these areas as being important places for growth to happen. And to get this done, we will be entering into a formal partnership agreement. The government is playing its part by investing $1.4 billion into the large-scale projects over the next 5 years. This funding is to be complemented by Auckland Council funding and support. Collectively, this investment across the 5 large-scale project areas will enable 16,000 new houses, including 2,000 additional new public houses and 10,000 additional affordable and market houses on Kāinga-Ora owned land. 4,000 new fit-for-purpose replacement public homes will also be enabled. The infrastructure capacity will also create the potential for up to 11,000 homes to be enabled on adjacent privately owned land. So all up, that we're talking about infrastructure that will enable 27,000 houses. So today's announcement complements recent changes we made to legislation to allow for more housing density in centrally located areas. It's another building block in addressing the housing crisis that we have inherited, to bring on more housing supply at scale and pace to areas where people want to live and to make their lives. I often ask myself the question, what would happen if we didn't make this investment, if the government didn't step up and put this $1.4 billion is? Well, the simple answer is that Kāinga Ora would probably be able to do some very nice retrofits of its existing housing. We would not see the ability to create density in the suburb. We would not have the opportunity to bring more people to live in this part of Auckland. So this is a commitment that our government is making to address that housing crisis. So we're happy to take questions, but Mia Goff, I think you're going to say a few words. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koutou, nā mana whenua, Ngāti Whātua o Orake, tēnā koutou. And good morning and welcome everybody here for a really special occasion. If it wasn't for COVID, I'd turn around and I'd hug the Minister, but we're keeping a social distance. Can I first of all acknowledge Megan Woods, Dr. Megan Woods as Minister of Housing, the first portfolio I ever had way back in 1984 in a different world. Can I acknowledge Michael Wood, Honourable Michael Wood as Minister, but most importantly as MP for the holy city of Mt Roskill, my successor, and as his predecessor, can I say what a fantastic job he's doing here, you know, really good. Arana Williams, MP for Mangere, welcome here. Vui Mark Goshi, who went to school with me, I think he was a bit younger, in Papatoetoe at one stage, and chair of the board, and Andrew and Mark from Kāinga Ora. Can I just first of all say, in a totally unscripted way, I can't think of a better example of intensification done well than what you see around us. As the MP here for 32 years, this was a little used park. Kaikuia grass and the odd straggly tree, and we tried to do a bit of tree planting at various times. And where these houses stood, there were the state houses. I don't want to knock those old state houses. They served our city really well, built in the 40s and the 50s, and I grew up in this area. They were relatively new in those days. It says something about me. And what we see is where one house stood, we now have three houses. This is intensification done well. Good open public space, high quality, good quality homes, and plenty of sunlight, daylight. This is something, actually, I think, that we all and government can be really proud of. And of course, to do something like this, you need lots of money. And money is something that's in short supply, probably for central and for local government. So that's why I really welcome the announcement today of another $1.4 billion, not to build the houses, but to create the infrastructure so that the houses can be built. And Megan has said this is about 16,000 extra houses directly. 6,000 of those will be state houses, a net addition of 2,000 when you take into account replacement. But these will be state houses where you can't tell a state house from any other house in the community. They are high quality. They're places that people are really proud to live in. And congratulations, Kāinga Ora. I'm really, as a former minister, really pleased to see what you're doing today and how you're doing it. The world has changed a lot. When the original houses here were built, we were talking about a city that was barely over 1/3 people. We're now talking about a city of 1.7 million, and we have to create the places for people to live. When I became mayor, we had a massive housing crisis, a shortage of housing and growing homelessness. We haven't solved that problem yet, but this sort of development and this sort of money, Minister, is what enables us to actually overcome that crisis and give people houses that they're proud to live in. Decent houses, warm houses, modern houses, in a setting where their kids can get out and play in an open public space like this. So this to me marks a huge transformation. Government and council are totally joined up on the concept that priority had to be given to what we called was the Auckland housing program. That was covering Mt Roskill, Mangere, Tāmaki, Oranga and Northcote. These are all brownfield developments, a high proportion of old state houses, and we wanted to build new houses where there was good transport infrastructure. And Minister of Transport, when we've got that light rail coming through, they'll have the best service. We wanted to build houses where they were close to schools and shops that were already there, and you could build strong communities. So what I'm celebrating today is not simply $1.4 billion of new money. I am celebrating that, but I'm celebrating the communities that we are creating, because there is nothing more fundamental than having good houses to live in for families and strong communities. And I grew up at a time when the old state houses were just a revolutionary for giving working people the chance to have decent homes to live in. And these houses will be the same. People that are trying to survive in private sector rentals, really expensive, people that are on the verge of or in homelessness will be helped by the emphasis that we're giving to public housing here today. So this really is a milestone to mark today and to celebrate. 1.4 billion on top of the 282 million, it's almost 1.7 billion. It's a big amount of money, but of course in infrastructure it doesn't go near far enough. But we are now making up for the absence of investment in infrastructure over decades, and this is what Tāmaki Makaurau desperately needs. A fantastic occasion for us to celebrate. My thanks to everybody that's participated in that. I look forward to the partnership agreement that we'll be signing with the government, working together to solve the problems that we confront in our city, and chief amongst those, the problem of housing shortage. Can I just say, from the council's perspective, we will be contributing to the capital cost of that. There'll be some hundreds of millions of dollars that go specifically into the Auckland housing development. And in our last budget, the long-term plan, we put 11 billion over the next 10 years into water. We put 10 billion into transport. We put 4 billion into parks, open spaces and community facilities. So a huge investment going on there, but an investment in the future of our country, our city and our communities. So please take this as a day. The sun is shining on us. We've got a beautiful background here. This is a day to celebrate for our city, Tāmaki Makaurau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, tola whalawa. I'm going to dispense with the written speech as you did, Mayor.
I forgot what I was going to say.
And welcome on behalf of Kāinga Ora, everybody here today. Minister, local Member of Parliament Michael and Arena, and Phil. It's not often you get the Minister with an ex-housing minister on each side of her on these occasions.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's what we have here today, and I mentioned that because this large-scale spend here is something I think is unprecedented in our time. I don't recall, and you wouldn't have recalled, anything of this scale or this nature that is being spent in enabling the building of houses, and then the building of houses on top of that is a considerable amount of money again. I want to acknowledge the mana whenua representatives here today who are part of this process and have been from the beginning of the large-scale projects here in Auckland, and will continue to be powerful partners in what we do in housing and infrastructure in the city forever. And without that partnership, we would not be doing the work the way we are doing it and the way it should be done. I'm looking around behind the cameras and other people from the media at some of our Kāinga Ora team. Andrew is here behind me. I've got Deputy Chair John Duncan here as well, and Mark Fraser, who's leading a wonderful team of people. You'll see on the white hat there, Piratahi. There is an alliance with our construction partners that is unique to this project, and we want to acknowledge all of the contribution of Kāinga Ora people, Piratahi people, and equally our community partnership and our mana whenua. This is about building community. So Kāinga Ora is the name. Actually, if you read the Act, it's Kāinga Ora Homes and Communities. So we are not just building things, we are creating communities, and we don't do that alone. So I'm extremely pleased, Minister, for the announcement today and for the work that it enables Kāinga Ora to do. I acknowledge all of the people who make that work happen. And I just say, wearing one of my other hats in health, if this money wasn't spent, you would be spending considerably more as a government on the health of our people, because we don't get housing right. We end up paying for it triply or even more in a dollar sense through our health system. But worse, we deal with it in human terms, where people suffer unnecessarily because they're not living in warm, dry houses. So thank you very much for the announcement today. Kāinga Ora is up for the challenge. We look forward to delivering on the projects that this funds and many more into the future. So I'm going to pass back to our mana whenua to close the formalities, and then the Minister and the Mayor will be available for questions, and then I think we're going to take people up for a look at the overall view of what's happening here in Mt Roskill. But let's not forget that we are talking other communities, one close to my heart in Mangere, which is my part of the world, and we've got North Shore, we've got Oranga, and we've got Tāmaki, which has been going, incidentally, since I was the Minister in 2000. So some of these projects take a long time, and that's why you need to invest properly in infrastructure at the beginning. So back to our mana whenua to close us off, and then we'll do the questions. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, te rangatira e Mark. Kia ora everyone, Pāpū Ngāti Whātua, it's been a great honour to come here today. We come in the spirit of manaakitanga, in the spirit of kotahitanga and whanaungatanga. Coming together in partnership to work together, and you mentioned some wonderful communities there, gosh, but please add Orake to that one. We have a vision of 100 new houses in Orake in the next 2 to 3 years. And I know our rangatira are working with your rangatira to try and make that happen. So just in closing, thank you everyone. Congratulations to Kāinga Ora. We came here 3 years ago, and as Mayor Goff said, you know, it was overgrown grass, absolutely terrible, but today it looks wonderful, and the community can be very proud. So thank you very much for having us here. Me noi tātou. Let us pray. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia tūri tapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma te ngā kau te tinana, te ara takata. Kui ara e rongo, pukeri aki ki runga, kia tīna, haumi e, kui e,
Taiki e. Kia ora. Right, happy to take any questions.
A lot of what we've heard today isn't actually new, we've heard before. So can you just tell us what is new in today's announcement?
So I think it was back in April last year, I came to this site and announced how we were going to split that $3.8 billion Housing Acceleration Fund. There was going to be a $1 billion contestable fund, and then there was going to be some money that went into our own large-scale projects. What it is today is that we've completed the detailed work as we said we would, and what we're announcing is how much is going into these large-scale projects. So that's the $1.4 billion is going to be invested in that area, and that is out of that 2021 Housing Acceleration Fund.
Given labour and material shortages, are there people to actually do the work?
So this is ground infrastructure work that needs to be done. And yes, there are people. That I think one of the things that we've seen in Auckland that has been a real innovation, and one of the reasons why of the Tranche 1 funding, that the projects are already underway and some are even completed, is the alliance that Vui Makgoshi spoke about with Piratahi, bringing together the contractors across the city to work on this, and that has been a success. I think the evidence of that is the fact that we have completed projects from Tranche 1.
Last question. With house prices falling, will there still be interest from developers in building?
Absolutely. That what we're building here, of course, when we talk about the number of houses that are going to be built, 6,000 of these will be public houses, 4,000 replacement, 2,000 additional houses. That Kāinga Ora has a really important part to play when it's building at this scale in smoothing the market as well, making sure that we do keep building activity going. But what we're also building here are affordable houses, and we know that there is strong demand for affordable housing product.
Just on that last
question. One thing I'll add in response to that question, we are still at a record level of consenting at Auckland Council. We're consenting about 20,000 houses, new houses a year. If I took you back to the start of Auckland City in 2010, the figure was about 3,000 or 4,000. So we're actually consenting 5 times as many houses each year, and this is a great sign that we are meeting some of the backlog of the housing need in Auckland, and we're starting to catch up on that shortage. Will there be pressures because of that huge increase? Yes, there are pressures out there, and there are pressures through things that we don't control, such as our supply chains internationally. But you know, I got 2 sons that are both working as tradesmen, and you know, they're saying they've got lots of work, they're busy, but things are being done, and things are being done now, not simply being talked about as they were, you know, a few years back. That's the difference.
You say we've got the people, but the materials specifically? Is it?
I think we need to be really clear about the work that we're talking about here. This is about housing infrastructure, that what needs to be done and to enable us to build those houses. And when I talk about housing infrastructure, I often describe it as just a fancy name for roads and pipes. That what we need to do is make sure that we've got the roading network right, and that we've got our water infrastructure largely that is capable with coping with density. So that work needs to be carried out before we can build the houses. In terms of the supply chain shortages, we know there are some constraints on the market at the moment, but that is not a reason for us to stop doing the preparatory work we need to do to continue to build houses. New Zealand simply does not have enough houses. For decades there has been underinvestment in housing infrastructure, and today what we're announcing is turning that around.
Could you give some context around the spending here? So it would come out at $87,500 for each house just on the infrastructure. Is that normal? Is that quite a lot?
So what we're talking about is brownfields development. So yes, brownfields development is often more expensive on the surface than doing new greenfields development. But what you also have to factor in there is that it's tapping into existing infrastructure such as public transport. You're not having to put in new infrastructure like schools, like shopping centres, like malls. But actually, that 87,000 is if you just do it across the 16,000 new houses that will be enabled on land that Kāinga Ora owns. Of course, there will be up to another 11,000 houses owned on privately owned adjacent land as well. So that takes it to 27,000 houses that will be enabled by this spend of 1.4 billion, which brings it down to, I think when I did the calculation, it's around 50 odd thousand per house, and that certainly is value for money for brownfields development.
Mayor Goff made a good point around the importance of state housing. Why not make more of this? Now promise it would be built for state housing.
So what we are doing across these LSPs is that we are building an additional 2,000 state houses in here. But across New Zealand, that our government is building an additional 18,000 state houses by 2024. That is a massive state house build, and we are doing that across communities right across New Zealand. That we have not seen this level of investment in new public housing in generations. So we do have a commitment for that, but we are also building communities. We want to build mixed communities. So largely the formula that we work on when we come in and we regenerate a neighbourhood is a third. So it's a third public housing, it's a third market affordable, and a third market. So that is the way in which we build strong and vibrant communities. And we also have to make sure that once again as a government that we're building public housing outside of our main urban centres. Regional New Zealand has been left for decades without public housing being added to it, and we've got a commitment to that.
Can I just add to that in response to regeneration? Because too often in the past, when you did regeneration, you knocked all the old houses down, you moved the old communities out, and you had a new higher income community that moved in. Of the 16,000 houses that will be enabled directly, 6,000 of those will be state houses. And that's just over the third. 4,000 replacement of the houses that were knocked down, plus 2,000 net additional. And I think that's a hugely good investment because if we don't invest directly in public housing, we're pouring more and more money into things like the accommodation supplement for people who are renting, which in turn translates really to a subsidy to the people that are renting the houses out to the tenants. So coming up as a boy that grew up in a state house suburb, I really welcome the fact that we are maintaining a lot of the character of this area in the communities that exist here. We're not moving the communities out, we're providing for the communities, and particularly in this area, our Pacifica communities and our Maori communities and our migrant communities.
Minister, can you just talk a little bit about the work that's been done here and what the work will be in the other 4 suburbs that are part of this as well?
Sure. Well, where we are today, this has very much been around stormwater and how it is that we can ensure that we can build on all the surrounding area. A lot of the work that is being done is around stormwater and around the waters more particularly to allow that level of intensification, and that's across all of the suburbs that we're building on. But it's also about transport as well, that we know a key part of how we enable housing is making sure that we've got roads and transport there. But I'm going to ask Mark to talk in some more detail about some of the work that's happening in the various suburbs.
So we're going to take you to the top of the Mangere after this, and hopefully you can join us. We'll be able to show you in a much better context than just this little piece here how big these projects are. This project's actually quite typical of the work that we're doing across the Auckland large-scale projects. Here we have a piece of stormwater infrastructure, but actually there's 1,100 homes and all the infrastructure necessary for them being delivered around this neighbourhood. It's hard to see when we're standing just here, and it's roading, power, comms, stormwater, open space, and setting the land up for the next actually several generations. So it's a very typical example of all the work we're doing.
Can I just add one thing about this I didn't mention before? When I talked about this being a pretty underutilised park and long grass, this was a piped drain. There was no water here. And this is a fantastic example of how you daylight your drains and you make an asset of the natural streams that run through the area. This is, this is world class in terms of the development. And we're seeing that sort of thing out in places like Takanini with the Awakiri wetlands. We're seeing it over at Northcote with the opening up of the streams and walkways along the streams. So we are building good quality houses, but we're creating great environments for those houses as well.
The point I'd just like to make, adding on to Mark's point as local MP, is that as people see additional houses coming into our community, there is a really strong expectation that we are providing that additional infrastructure. So in addition to the open space, in addition to the transport networks, it's also things like our local schools. So it's really worth noting that our local school just up the road here, May Road, is also receiving investment from our government to make sure that it's got the capacity to support the increased number of families who will come into our communities. So there's a lot of joint work going between government, local government, but between ministers as well, to make sure that we join the dots and make this really successful.
Great, we've probably got time for one more question.
How will this impact housing affordability across Auckland?
So it's these kind of projects that are making sure we are delivering affordable houses into the market. That, as I talked about earlier, that what we have is we build these communities based on a third public housing, a third affordable housing. It is the fact that we are, as a government, leading the charge on making sure that we have a commitment to delivering houses more affordably so people can get into home ownership.